We all know the devastation caused by the Hiroshima bombing of 1945 and how this 15-kiloton beast marked its name in the historical book of warfare. However, have you ever thought about how massive an event it would be if the little boy bomb of Hiroshima was launched into outer space? Would there be a more massive mushroom cloud? Would there be a pile-up of radiation in space? Could the shockwave potentially destroy the moon? Well, let's say the USA kinda took it up a notch when they actually nuked space. You heard that right. Bombs were detonated in space. It gets more interesting when you realize that it wasn't even the first time space was nuked. Never heard about it? Don't worry, just watch this video to the end. We've got you covered. Today, we tell the tale of the US nuking of space and how it could potentially change our understanding of nuclear power. Welcome to the Space Minds channel. Glad to have you on another adventure as we unveil hidden mysteries about space. If you love mind-blowing stories about space, then you're in the right place. Want to join us on more space adventures? Hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so we can send you updates on all our newest adventures. If you think the launch of nuclear bombs into space was only a scientific experiment, you might actually be wrong. The geopolitical conflict that broke out between the Soviet Union and the US between 1947 and 1991 birthed the idea of space nuking. It all began with both parties testing extremely powerful nuclear warheads here on Earth, all as a show of power. In a bid to assert dominance, both parties individually tabled one question: how about space? As it turned out, whoever controlled space actually had maximum control and was to be tagged supreme. The Soviet Union was already on the mark, and their technological and military advancement were climbing much faster. This, however, didn't really tell the US how powerful her adversary was. October the 4th, 1957 was the date that sealed the space race between the two Cold War rivals. It was on this day that the Soviet Union launched the first man-made satellite, Sputnik 1, into space. Even though the polished metal sphere fell back to Earth 3 months later, it managed to unanimously tell the US that the Soviet was above them. The space race became much more serious when the Soviet again launched the first human, Yuri Gagarin, into space in 1961. The US was left in shock. They had to respond quickly. Following 2 heavy blows from the Soviet space program, US President John F. Kennedy signed documents on 2 ammunition test projects in 1962. Operation Dominic, which involved 31 nuclear test explosions, was conducted in the Pacific Ocean. Then, as part of Operation Dominic, a second nuclear detonation project called Operation Fishbowl was carried out by the US. It originally involved 3 tests named Bluegill, Starfish, and Eureka. What was the turnout of these space bombings? Bluegill was the first test of Operation Fishbowl on June 2, 1962. The nuclear warhead was placed on a Thor missile and fired just past midnight. All too soon, radar tracking of the middle was lost. In other words, no one knew the position of the warhead in the atmosphere or in space. In a bid to avoid a huge mistake that could cost millions of lives and cause a war, the range safety officers of the project ordered that the warhead and missile be destroyed in mid-air. Technically, no detonation occurred and nothing was recorded about the outcome of the test. Years later, it was revealed that if the warhead and missile had not been destroyed, the test would have turned out successful without any casualties. 17 days after the Bluegill test failed, the second nuclear detonation test was carried out. Just past midnight on June 19, 1962, another nuclear warhead was launched on a Thor missile. After following a normal trajectory for 59 seconds, the rocket engine came to an abrupt stop in mid-air. Yet again, another failure. The safety officers made the difficult decision again and had the missile and warhead destroyed mid-air. Metallic and radioactive debris came upon Johnston Island and the surrounding river. Luckily, everyone had been evacuated before the test. It took 2 weeks to recover over 200 pieces of the debris, some of which were already heavily seeded with radioactive plutonium. Believe it or not, the safety of the waters around the island is still questionable up until today. With the failure of the starfish test, a new test had to be conducted, this time under the name of the Last Fail test. This test, called Starfish Prime, was the game changer. Around 9 p.m. on July 9, 1962, a nuclear warhead was again launched on a Thor missile. With the missile already 1,100 kilometers above the Earth's surface, the ammunition was now free-falling in space. As the warhead got to the required 400 kilometers height for its detonation, the detonation switch was flipped. With an energy level over 1,000 times more than the Hiroshima bombing, the warhead left a lasting mark both on Earth and in space. The explosion created a beautiful aurora over the Pacific and Hawaii. The brightness of the explosion was recorded even around Johnston and the French frigate shoals for days, showing that a lot of nuclear debris was still in space. The illumination even aided submarine activities. Media attention was drawn to the bright circle created by the explosion. News spread worldwide in minutes, and the Soviet Union definitely got information about it. It was a beautiful show of power. Considering the degree of damage caused by the Starfish Prime test and the legal actions that could be taken against the US government, Eureka, which was supposed to be the third of 3 tests of Operation Fishbowl, was never undertaken. Behind the beautiful view of the explosion was a horrible, terrifying view of space. The explosion caused damages that were beyond imaginable. Firstly, it released so many electrons and radioactive particles into the Earth-space interface just above the Earth's atmosphere. This created concerns for human lives, as that much radiation could wipe out entire populations. It didn't end there. The electromagnetic release of the warhead knocked out 3 satellites only days later, including the first Navy satellite system, NNSS, and also the Track satellite, which initially transmitted data back to Earth on the radiation effects of such massive nuclear warheads detonated in space. In the following months, at least 6 more satellites went completely damaged, including Tesla, the first commercial communication satellite, and Ariel 1, the first satellite from the United Kingdom. On Earth, the explosion caused widespread electrical damage in Hawaii, destroying around 300 streetlights, hundreds of burglar alarms, and even a telephone company microwave signal. Every inch of Hawaii lacked telephone signals. The health impacts of the explosion lacked much investigation, but there are theories that the explosion released enough particles to cause cancers and deaths around the world. We could say that the space race almost caused a new form of war that could have been many times worse than World War II, a war of nuclear power. For this reason, the Soviets and US signed a treaty a year later banning all nuclear warhead tests, whether in the atmosphere, underwater, or in space. Even though only one of the 3 warhead tests was successful, the nuclear weapon detonation by the US registered a powerful response in the Soviet Union, sending shockwaves both metaphorically and literally to countries willing to join the opposition. The war, however, was not close to being over between these two. The space race climbed to its peak when both parties got involved in what was called the Moon Race, an unspoken rivalry over who landed on the moon first. President John F. Kennedy had urged the US Congress to pull in all their efforts to successfully land a man on the moon and get him back to Earth. With this, both countries started a massive struggle to win off the moon. 7 years after the Starfish Prime test, the US successfully landed 2 men, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, on the moon in July of 1969. Armstrong became the first man to land on the moon. Slowly, the space race came to an end as the Soviets decided to pursue other projects like the first landing on Venus and Mars. The US, however, shoved their victory in the faces of their adversary by landing 5 more times on the moon. Considering that many countries now own thousands of ammunitions, we should hope that a new mega war doesn't come up. The US, being the first to own a nuclear weapon, had over 5,000 of such in their arsenal, enough to wreak havoc on Earth if a war broke out. How about Russia? Well, after inheriting inheriting the Soviet Union's arsenal of weapons, they could have even more nuclear ballistics than the US herself. These could wipe out entire cities in seconds. Even countries like Pakistan, France, the United Kingdom, China, Israel, and North Korea could stand at the forefront if a nuclear war comes into question. With these countries stepping on each other's tails in recent times, a nuclear war could even break out on the ownership of parts of the moon or parts of space itself. If such happens, well, mankind's survival could become almost impossible. USA space nuking was only a fight for power against the Soviet Union. Though it paved the way for many of the space advancements men have achieved today, it also explains how uncertain man's position is in the future. In other words, to some we made progress, to others we created monsters. And with that, we end our adventure here today. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Space Minds for the latest updates on our space news and adventures.